Your hands are slick on the yoke. The B-17 groans around you, a dying beast held aloft by sheer will. Below, the green fields of England promise safety. But the training manual says you'll never make it. Your hydraulic lines are shredded. Your controls feel like they're set in concrete. And the runway is a postage stamp. But there's a new procedure, a whispered rumor on the flight line. A suicidal technique that breaks every rule. Cut the power, stall the plane, and pray. This is the story of the landing that was never supposed to work. By the grim year of 1944, the 8th Air Force had turned the skies over Europe into a sprawling, three-dimensional battlefield. For the 10-man crews of the B-17 Flying Fortress, survival was a brutal equation of altitude, firepower, and luck. They flew through storms of flak that turned the air black and fought off swarms of enemy fighters that tore through their aluminum skins. The journey home, crossing the cold English Channel, was meant to be the end of the ordeal. But for a terrifying number of crews, it was merely the prelude to the final, fatal act. The enemy wasn't the Luftwaffe anymore. It was physics, gravity, and the very rule book they had been trained to obey. The bombers returning were not the proud machines that had taken off hours earlier. They were flying ghosts, riddled with holes, trailing smoke, and often missing entire control surfaces. Hydraulic systems, the lifeblood that moved flaps and landing gear, were frequently severed. Engines were dead or dying, throwing the aircraft into an unstable, lopsided battle against the air itself. These crippled giants were a pilot's worst nightmare, and the most dangerous part of their mission was the last 500 feet. The standard landing procedure for a B-17 was a thing of grace and precision, drilled into every pilot in the clear skies of American training grounds. It demanded a long, stable, powered approach. The pilot would line up with the runway from miles out, gradually reducing speed to a careful 110 miles per hour, gently easing the 30-ton machine onto the tarmac. This textbook method was designed for an intact aircraft, a machine that responded predictably to every delicate input. But for a battle-damaged bomber, this gentle approach was a death trap. Holding a low speed required perfect control, something these pilots no longer had. The long, drawn-out process gave 1,000 failing systems 1,000 opportunities to finally give out. A flickering engine could choose that moment to quit, causing the plane to roll uncontrollably. A damaged wing could stall at low speed, sending the bomber cartwheeling into the ground. At emergency airfields across England, like RAF Woodbridge and RAF Manston, a grim pattern emerged. Crews who had miraculously survived hours of combat over Germany were perishing in fiery crashes within sight of safety. The very procedure designed to bring them home was killing them. This tragic paradox was not lost on the men of the 8th Bomber Command. On the ground, they watched helplessly as heroes died not in battle, but in accidents born of battle's consequences. One of those watching was a man named Captain Howard Bowie, a B-17 pilot with the 388th Bomb Group based at RAF Kennedyshall. Known as Slim to his friends, Bowie was a keen observer, a pilot who thought beyond the cockpit checklist. He saw the mounting losses, not as isolated incidents of bad luck or pilot error, but as a systemic failure. He saw friends return from hell, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief, only to be wiped from existence moments later. The flight manual offered no solutions. It was written for a perfect world, not for the mangled reality of aerial warfare. The official doctrine demanded a slow, stable approach, but these planes were anything but stable. They were teetering on a knife's edge, and the standard procedure was simply pushing them over. Boy realized that the core of the problem wasn't the planes or the pilots, it was the element of time. The longer a crippled bomber spent in that fragile, low-speed state, the greater the odds of catastrophe. This realization led him to a question that bordered on heresy in the world of aviation. What if the answer wasn't to be more careful, more gentle? What if the key to survival was to be faster, more aggressive, and more violent? He began to formulate a theory that ran contrary to every instinct and every page of the flight manual. Instead of fighting the plane's instability, a pilot should embrace it for a few controlled seconds. Instead of a long, agonizing approach, it should be brutally short. The goal was to minimize the time spent in the danger zone, that terrifying period of low-speed flight just above the ground. To do this, a pilot would have to fly his crippled bomber at the runway with what seemed like reckless speed, throwing away altitude and building up momentum. He would keep the energy high, forcing the damaged wings to fly, denying them the chance to stall prematurely. Then, at the last possible second, he would perform an act that every pilot was taught was the ultimate sin. He would intentionally, deliberately, and violently stall the airplane, forcing it onto the ground before it had a chance to fall out of the sky on its own terms. It was a theory born of desperation, a controlled crash designed to prevent an uncontrolled one. It was an idea that, on paper, looked like pure suicide. Captain Buoy's concept, which he would christen the power-off stall landing, was a symphony of controlled violence. It began with a radical departure from the norm long before the runway was in sight. Instead of the gentle, decelerating glide path, Buoy's pilot would dive towards the airfield, maintaining an airspeed between 135 and 145 miles per hour. This was a speed normally reserved for cruising or even shallow dives, not for landing. To the uninitiated on the ground, it would look like the pilot had lost his mind, that the bomber was destined to overshoot the field and smash into the English countryside. But this speed was the secret ingredient. It generated enormous lift over the damaged wings, giving the pilot a precious reserve of control and stability that a slower approach would have bled away. The plane was not on the verge of stalling. It was flying with authority. The pilot would hold this terrifying high-speed approach until the bomber was just 20 feet above the runway threshold, a height so low that the ground would be a blur of green and gray. It was in this final, heart-stopping moment that the procedure demanded a sequence of actions that felt like a betrayal of every known principle of flight. The pilot would simultaneously perform two drastic maneuvers. First, he would pull all four throttles back to idle, instantly cutting power from the engines. The roar of the Wright Cyclone engines would die, replaced by the deafening shriek of the wind. Second, he would haul back on the control yoke with all his strength, pulling the bomber's nose up into a sharp, aggressive climb. For a split second, the aircraft would be pointing at the sky. But without engine power and with its angle of attack now impossibly high, the laws of aerodynamics delivered their swift verdict. The wings would instantly and completely stall. Lift would vanish. The 30-ton bomber would cease to be an airplane and would become, for all intents and purposes, a falling object. It would drop vertically, like a stone, pancaking onto the runway with a bone-jarring impact. The theory was that this brutal but survivable impact, absorbed by the B-17's famously robust landing gear, was infinitely preferable to an uncontrolled roll or a high-speed crash at the far end of the field. The stall guaranteed the plane stayed on the runway with no chance of bouncing or overshooting. This was a pact with gravity, made on the pilot's terms. To even consider it required an almost fanatical faith in the engineering of the Boeing B-17. The Flying Fortress was legendary for its toughness. Tales of B-17s returning to base with tails shredded, engines on fire, and wings that looked like Swiss cheese were common in every Nissen hut and officers' club. Boy was counting on a specific aspect of this durability: its landing gear. The gear was massively over-engineered, designed to withstand the punishment of rough, hastily constructed airfields. It was this hidden strength that made the entire concept plausible. The gear had to absorb the entire vertical momentum of a stalled 60,000-pound aircraft without collapsing. Any other bomber might have been torn apart by the impact, but Bowie wagered that the Fortress could take it. He wasn't just inventing a new technique. He was leveraging the inherent, unwritten capabilities of his machine. He saw the B-17 not just as a bomber, but as a survival capsule, and this procedure was the key to unlocking its final, desperate defense mechanism. Armed with his theory, Captain Bowie couldn't simply start teaching it on his own. Such a flagrant violation of established doctrine would have seen him court-martialed or sent for a psychiatric evaluation. He needed official sanction, starting with his own chain of command. He took his proposal to his squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel William Creer. Creer was a seasoned leader, responsible for the lives of hundreds of men. He listened as Bowie laid out his logic, explaining how the slow approach was the real enemy and how a controlled, violent stall could be the antidote. He surely felt the same knot in his stomach that every pilot felt when hearing the idea. It was insane. It broke every rule. It invited the one catastrophic event pilots spent their entire careers avoiding. And yet, the logic was undeniable. Creer had seen the same fiery crashes Bowie had. He knew the official manual was failing his men. He was faced with a choice: stick to the failing, safe procedure, or take a gamble on a radical, suicidal one that just might work. In an act of profound trust and courage, Creer made his decision. He authorized Captain Bowie to conduct initial, highly controlled test flights. The theory would now face its ultimate test: reality. The first test flights, conducted on February 23, 1944, were a lonely and nerve-wracking affair. Captain Bowie took an undamaged B-17 up into the gray skies over RAF Kennedyshall. On the ground, a small, anxious group of onlookers, including Lieutenant Colonel Creer, watched as Bowie lined up for his approach. He pushed the nose down, letting the airspeed build to the prescribed 140 miles per hour. The bomber thundered towards the runway, far faster and lower than any had before. To the observers, it was a terrifying sight, a textbook example of an approach gone horribly wrong. In the control tower, men instinctively reached for the crash alarm. Then, just as the bomber seemed certain to careen off the end of the field, they witnessed the impossible. The engine noise abruptly died, the nose pitched up violently, and the giant aircraft seemed to hang in the air for a heartbeat before dropping straight down. It hit the runway with a tremendous thud that echoed across the airfield, bounced once, then settled and rolled to a stop in a remarkably short distance. He had done it. He repeated the maneuver again and again, each landing a perfect, brutal demonstration of his theory. The B-17, true to his faith in its design, absorbed the punishment without complaint. The success of these initial demonstrations created a new problem. The technique was proven to work on a healthy aircraft with a skilled pilot at the controls, but how could this be translated into a life-saving procedure for a terrified 19-year-old wrestling with a half-destroyed bomber. Bowie's idea was now a command-level issue, escalating beyond his squadron to the 8th Bomber Command Headquarters. Here he faced a wall of institutional resistance. He stood before panels of senior officers, colonels and generals, men who had built their careers on the very flight regulations he now proposed to shatter. To them, stall was a forbidden word, synonymous with incompetence and death. The idea of intentionally inducing a full stall at 20 feet was not just unorthodox, it was professional suicide. They saw the procedure as trading a potential crash for a guaranteed one. The risk of misjudgment was immense. Come in too high and the drop would shatter the plane's spine. Stall too late and you'd still overshoot the runway. Stall too early and you'd hit the ground short of the tarmac. They argued that it placed an impossible burden on a pilot already taxed to his physical and emotional limits. What Bowie needed was an advocate, a powerful voice who could see past the ingrained dogma and recognize the brutal logic of his innovation. He found that advocate in Brigadier General Frederick Castle. Castle was not just a desk-bound commander. He was a pilot's general, a man who understood the grim realities his crews faced every day. He had seen the casualty reports, read the after-action summaries of landing accidents, and understood that the status quo was unacceptable. When Bowie briefed him, Castle listened not with the skepticism of a career officer protecting doctrine, but with the pragmatism of a leader desperate for solutions. He saw the genius in its simplicity. It was a last-ditch, binary choice. It might fail, but the standard procedure was already failing. Castle's endorsement was the key that unlocked the door to official acceptance. He championed Bowie's cause, arguing that in the desperate calculus of war, a technique that offered even a chance of saving a 10-man crew was a chance worth taking. His influence was immense, and his support turned the tide. With Castle's backing, the institutional inertia finally gave way. On March 19, 1944, the 8th Bomber Command issued Technical Order 123. This dry, bureaucratic document was, in reality, a revolutionary text. It officially sanctioned the power-off stall landing for emergency use only. It was a carefully worded order, stressing that this was a procedure of last resort, to be used only when a conventional landing was deemed impossible due to battle damage. Captain Bowie was tasked with training a cadre of instructors who then fanned out across the bomber bases in England, teaching the suicidal technique to thousands of pilots. They used diagrams, classroom sessions, and flight demonstrations. For the young pilots, it was a surreal experience. One day they were being drilled on avoiding stalls at all costs. The next, they were being taught how to execute one perfectly. It was a profound psychological shift, asking them to unlearn their most fundamental instinct to save their own lives. They were being handed a key, a secret weapon to be used in their darkest hour, a final, desperate move in the chess match against death. The true test of Technical Order 123 would not come in training flights over the peaceful English countryside. It would come in the chaos and terror of a mission gone wrong, in the final moments of a flight back from hell. Soon, reports began to filter back to 8th Bomber Command Headquarters. Anecdotal evidence at first, then a steady stream of after-action reports that painted a stunning picture of the technique's effectiveness. One of the most famous early proponents was Captain Robert Rosie Rosenthal of the 100th Bomb Group, an outfit grimly nicknamed the Bloody Hundredth for its staggering loss rates. Rosenthal was a legend, a pilot who had completed his tour of 25 missions and then volunteered for another. On one mission, his B-17 was savaged by flak and fighters. He nursed the crippled bomber back across the channel, his controls shredded, one engine out and another on fire. A standard landing was out of the question. Approaching his base, Rosenthal remembered Buoy's unorthodox training. He brought the plane in high and fast, holding it together with sheer force of will. Just over the runway, he chopped the power and hauled back on the yoke. The bomber slammed onto the runway, the impact extinguishing the engine fire and saving his entire crew. Stories like Rosenthal's became a powerful form of validation, spreading from group to group. But perhaps no story better illustrates the life or death stakes than that of First Lieutenant William Wild Bill Lawley. On a mission in February 1944, even before the technique was officially sanctioned, Lawley's B-17 was torn apart. Flak killed his co-pilot instantly and left Lawley himself severely wounded, with deep gashes to his face and neck, impairing his vision. 8 of his 10 crewmen were also wounded, and the bomber was a wreck. The hydraulic systems were gone, the oxygen was out, and one engine was ablaze. With the controls nearly frozen, Lawley and his crew fought for 2 hours to keep the plane in the air. Over England, he ordered his crew to bail out, but the wounded men could not. Realizing he was their only hope, Lawley, lapsing in and out of consciousness from blood loss, aimed the dying bomber at a runway. He knew a normal landing would be fatal. Using the last of his strength, he forced the plane into a high-speed approach and, at the last moment, stalled it onto the field. The aircraft broke its back on impact, but the crew compartment remained intact. Lawley had saved his crew. For his incredible heroism, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, his citation specifically noting the unconventional landing that had made survival possible. The impact of Buoy's technique was immediate and dramatic. It's estimated that the power-off stall landing reduced fatalities from emergency landings by a staggering 60%. While precise numbers are impossible to calculate from the fog of war, this figure suggests that hundreds of trained airmen, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and gunners were saved. These were not just statistics. They were irreplaceable veterans. Every crew saved was a crew that could potentially fly again, taking their hard-won combat experience back into the fight. The psychological effect on morale was just as significant. It gave crews a vital tool, a sense of agency in a situation that had previously felt hopeless. They were no longer helpless victims of their damaged aircraft. They had a final, desperate card to play, a technique that transformed a potential disaster into a survivable event. This newfound confidence was a weapon in itself, helping crews endure the grueling stress of the air war. This remarkable success had an unintended and demoralizing effect on the enemy. German fighter pilots and anti-aircraft gunners would often witness American bombers absorbing what should have been catastrophic damage. They would see a B-17 peel away from the formation, trailing smoke and debris, and logically write it off as another kill. They assumed the crippled aircraft was doomed, that it would either explode in midair or crash attempting to land. But then, to their astonishment, Allied intelligence would later show that the very same bomber they had marked as destroyed had made it home. They would hear reports of heavily damaged fortresses appearing over English airfields, seemingly about to crash, only to execute a strange, abrupt landing and come to a sudden halt. For the Luftwaffe, it was confounding. It seemed the American bombers were simply refusing to die. They didn't know about Captain Buoy's secret technique. They only saw the result, a resilience that seemed almost supernatural, chipping away at their own morale and reinforcing the legend of the B-17's indestructibility. The genius of the power-off stall landing was not confined to a single aircraft type. While it was born from the specific crisis facing B-17 crews, its underlying principles of energy management and controlled impact were universally applicable. Pilots of the consolidated B-24 Liberator, the other heavy workhorse of the 8th Air Force, soon began adapting the technique. The Liberator, with its high-mounted Davis wing, had very different flight characteristics from the B-17. It was notoriously less forgiving at low speeds and more prone to violent stalls. For B-24 pilots, a battle-damaged approach was arguably an even more terrifying prospect. Yet they too found that a high-speed, last-second stall, while incredibly risky, was often the only viable path to survival. The procedure had to be modified, approach speeds were adjusted, the timing of the stall was even more critical, but the core concept remained the same. Get the wounded bird on the ground as quickly and decisively as possible. This cross-platform adoption was a testament to the fundamental soundness of Bouilly's logic, proving it was a triumph of physics and piloting skill, not just a quirk of one specific airframe. The innovation soon crossed national lines. At bases across England, American and British aircrews shared airfields, mess halls, and harrowing stories. Pilots from the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command, flying their iconic Avro Lancasters and Handley Page Halifaxes, listened with keen interest. They faced the same relentless enemy and the same brutal consequences of battle damage. While their 4-engine heavy bombers were different in design and handling, the problem of landing a crippled machine was identical. RAF pilots, known for their own brand of daring and improvisation, began experimenting with variations of the American technique. They developed their own procedures, tailored to the unique stall characteristics and structural strengths of their aircraft. It became part of an informal, international body of knowledge, a collection of desperate measures for desperate times, shared between men who understood that survival in the air depended on a willingness to break the rules that were written on the ground. The idea that began in the mind of a single American captain had become a lifeline for the Allied strategic bombing campaign as a whole. The 3 primary emergency airfields in England, RAF Woodbridge, RAF Manston, and RAF Carnaby, became the unwilling theaters where this drama played out daily. These were not ordinary air bases. They were purpose-built sanctuaries for dying aircraft, equipped with exceptionally long and wide runways, specialized crash crews, and extensive medical facilities. They were the last hope for any pilot limping home from the continent. The men stationed at these fields witnessed the full spectrum of aerial warfare's horror and heroism. They saw bombers arrive in conditions that defied belief, with noses blown off, tails barely attached, and engines torn from their mountings. And it was here that the power-off stall landing became a common, if terrifying, spectacle. The control tower operators and ground crews would hold their breath as a Fortress or a Liberator screamed towards them, knowing exactly what was about to happen. The sudden silence as the engines cut, the sharp pitch-up, and the sickening thud of the impact became a familiar rhythm of survival. For every successful, bone-jarring landing, another crew was lost. But Bouilly's technique had fundamentally shifted the odds in favor of the living. Captain Howard "Slim" Bouilly was not awarded the Medal of Honor. His name is not as widely known as the famous aces or decorated generals of the war. His contribution was of a different kind. It wasn't an act of singular explosive bravery in the face of the enemy, but a sustained, intellectual courage in the face of institutional dogma. He fought a battle not against Messerschmitts, but against assumption and inertia. By daring to question the sacred texts of aviation, he saved countless lives. His legacy is written not in medals or headlines, but in the quiet, unrecorded moments when a young pilot, hands trembling on the controls of a failing bomber, remembered his training, took a deep breath, and committed the ultimate act of faith, stalling his aircraft to save his crew. He provided a final, crucial tool that allowed men who had already proven their bravery over enemy territory to complete their journey and survive the peace of an English morning. His innovation was a force multiplier, preserving the most valuable asset the 8th Air Force had, its experienced combat crews. The success of the power-off stall landing was not merely a testament to one pilot's ingenuity, but also to the profound, almost stubborn toughness of his chosen aircraft. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was the product of a pre-war design philosophy that prioritized durability above all else. In the 1930s, when the aircraft was conceived, Boeing's engineers built it to a standard, not just a specification. They layered in redundancies and over-engineered critical components, operating on the assumption that the plane would be flown into harm's way and would need to absorb incredible punishment to bring its crew home. The main wing spar, a massive beam running through the fuselage, was so strong it could keep the wings attached even after sustaining direct cannon hits that would have disintegrated lesser aircraft. Control cables were duplicated and routed through different parts of the fuselage, making it less likely that a single burst of flak could sever them all. This deep-seated resilience was the canvas upon which Bui painted his masterpiece of desperation. The landing gear itself was a marvel of robust engineering. It was designed to operate on the primitive, often unpaved airfields of the era, built to handle hard landings in difficult conditions. The massive oleo struts acted like giant shock absorbers, and the entire assembly was anchored to the strongest parts of the wing structure. When Captain Bui proposed dropping a 30-ton bomber onto a runway, he was intuitively tapping into this hidden reservoir of strength. The engineers at Boeing had likely never envisioned their landing gear being used to absorb the kinetic energy of a deliberate, full stall from 20 feet. But by building it to withstand the worst imaginable conventional landing, they had inadvertently created a system that could survive Bui's unconventional one. The technique worked because the plane was fundamentally designed to forgive, to bend where others would break, and to protect its crew even when its own aerodynamic grace had been violently stripped away. This synergy between man and machine arrived at a critical juncture in the Strategic Air War. By 1944, the Allied bombing campaign was reaching its devastating crescendo. Fleets of over 1,000 bombers were now striking deep into the heart of the Reich, targeting synthetic oil plants, aircraft factories, and marshalling yards. This was attrition warfare on an industrial scale, and the most precious resource was not aluminum or high-octane fuel. It was experienced air crews. A bomber could be replaced in a matter of weeks, but a veteran 10-man crew with its intricate teamwork and priceless combat knowledge was irreplaceable. The Bloody Hundredth had earned its nickname for a reason. The learning curve in the skies over Germany was vertical, and a new crew's life expectancy was measured in a handful of missions. Every bomber that crashed on landing in England wasn't just the loss of an aircraft, it was the loss of a decade of cumulative experience. In this context, Captain Bui's innovation transcended mere tactical cleverness. It became a strategically significant factor. Saving 60% of crews who would have otherwise perished in landing accidents had a powerful ripple effect. It meant more veteran pilots were available to lead formations. It meant more navigators knew the landmarks to key targets by heart. It meant more gunners had the honed instincts to spot a fighter's attack run before it developed. By preserving this core of hardened veterans, the power-off stall technique helped the 8th Air Force maintain its operational effectiveness and relentless pressure on the German war machine. It was a small-scale solution with a large-scale impact. A perfect example of how an innovation born on a single airfield could influence the broader course of the war. It embodied the American approach, a marriage of mass-produced technological might with a relentless, on-the-ground pragmatism that empowered individuals to find new ways to win. As the war in Europe ground to its thunderous conclusion in May of 1945, the skies over England fell quiet. The drone of 1,000 bombers heading east at dawn was replaced by the sounds of a continent slowly beginning to heal. The emergency airfields at Woodbridge, Manston, and Carnaby, once the busiest and most stressful plots of land in the country, saw their purpose evaporate. The crippled birds stopped coming home. The story of the air war is often told in the grand sweep of major battles, the bombing of Schweinfurt, the firestorm of Dresden, but its final chapters were written in these quiet moments of survival, in the thousands of individual victories against gravity and damage that allowed men to return to their families. The power-off stall landing was a product of this specific, brutal time, a desperate solution to a desperate problem. With the advent of peace and the dawn of the jet age, the technique itself faded into relative obscurity. It was a wartime relic. Modern aircraft, with their sophisticated fly-by-wire systems, multiple hydraulic redundancies, and vastly different aerodynamic profiles, would not be suitable for such a maneuver. Aviation safety, rightly, returned to a doctrine of precision, stability, and avoiding stalls at all costs. The conditions that made Bouilly's technique necessary, fleets of relatively simple, mechanically linked aircraft absorbing unimaginable levels of punishment, were unique to the Second World War. The procedure was never meant to be a permanent part of the pilot's handbook. It was an emergency bypass, a piece of forbidden knowledge to be used only when the book had been shot to pieces and thrown out the window. Its disappearance from modern training manuals is, in itself, a testament to the advances in aircraft survivability it helped to inspire. Yet for those who lived through it, the memory of the technique would remain etched in their minds. It is impossible to overstate the psychological courage it took for a pilot to execute this landing. It required him to consciously override every instinct for self-preservation. In those final seconds, hurtling towards the ground at terrifying speed, he had to trust. He had to trust in the counterintuitive logic of a captain he'd likely never met. He had to trust in the unseen engineers at a Boeing factory, thousands of miles away, who had built his fortress to be unbreakable. And he had to trust in his own ability to perform these violent, precise actions at the one moment when failure meant certain death for himself and the 9 other men who had placed their lives in his hands. It was the ultimate expression of a pilot's skill, not in its grace, but in its controlled, calculated brutality. The power-off stall landing, therefore, stands as more than just a forgotten chapter of aviation history. It is a monument to the relentless ingenuity that flourishes under the intense pressure of combat. It serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound solutions are found by defying conventional wisdom and embracing a radical idea. In the war-torn skies of 1944, Captain Howard Buey and the pilots he trained did not just land their airplanes. They weaponized the stall, turning the aviator's greatest fear into a tool of salvation. They mastered the art of the controlled crash, cheating death at the last possible second, and rewriting the calculus of survival for the bomber crews of the mighty Eighth. It was a final, defiant act of control in a world of chaos, a landing that broke every rule to uphold the only one that truly mattered, bringing the boys back home.